A quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knows each other. The perfect place to start a new life? Or is it? This is a story of secrets, fear, and a choice that could cost a life. Are you ready to find out who he is? The suspicious neighbor? Lisa took a deep breath of fresh air as she stood on the porch of her new home. She had recently moved to this quiet neighborhood to leave behind the noise of the city and start a new life. She longed for peace, a sense of safety, and this place seemed perfect. Neat houses, tidy lawns, polite neighbors, just what she needed after months of stress. Her new house stood across from one that looked out of place. Its windows were always curtained, the facade needed painting, and there were no signs of life in the yard. Within days, Lisa noticed its occupant. A tall man, dressed in dark clothing, who only left his house late at night. He carried large packages, always carefully locking his door before vanishing into the shadows. She never saw him interact with anyone. One day, Lisa decided to learn more about him. During a conversation with her neighbor, a friendly elderly woman named Martha, she cautiously asked about the peculiar man. Martha shrugged but lowered her voice to a whisper. "We don't know much about him. He's always been a loner. Some say he's hiding something, but who knows?" Other neighbors, overhearing the conversation, cast wary glances toward his house but said nothing concrete. These conversations only fueled Lisa's curiosity. She started noticing more details. How the man never turned on lights in his house, the heavy thuds and creaks at night, and the strangely bulky packages. It all gave her an unsettling feeling that something was wrong. Lisa decided she would watch him closely. Something about this neighbor was definitely not right. In the following days, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off. She started paying closer attention to the house across the street. She noticed that the man never turned on any lights, but at night, a faint red glow emanated from the basement window. The light flickered irregularly, as if from a fire or some old-fashioned lamp, only adding to her unease. One evening, as Lisa was getting ready for bed, she heard strange noises coming from the man's house. It was a mix of rustling, muffled thuds, and what sounded like digging. She pressed herself against her window, trying to see anything in the darkness, but the house remained cloaked in shadows. Only the eerie red glow from the basement hinted at movement inside. "What is he doing in there?" she wondered, her anxiety growing. The next day, while shopping for groceries, Lisa felt a presence behind her. She turned sharply and found herself face to face with her neighbor. His expression was neutral, but his cold eyes sent a chill down her spine. "Excuse me," Lisa murmured, stepping aside quickly. She hadn't even noticed him enter the store. He stared at her for a moment longer than felt comfortable before walking away silently. The encounter left her rattled. Something about his gaze made her skin crawl, and she couldn't help but feel that he knew she had been watching him. Whatever he was doing, Lisa knew she had to find out more. Lisa decided to take action. She set up a small camera by her window, aimed directly at the neighbor's house. If anything suspicious was happening, she was determined to catch it. Every night, she reviewed the footage, hoping to uncover his secrets. It didn't take long. The very first night, the camera captured him carrying large black plastic-wrapped packages out of the house. He loaded them into the trunk of his car, glancing nervously around before driving off. Hours later, he returned with the car empty. This routine repeated for several nights, and Lisa couldn't stop imagining what might be inside those packages. Then, one night, the camera captured something truly bizarre. A shadow appeared in the window of the neighbor's house. At first, it seemed human, but as Lisa zoomed in, her heart stopped. The shadow was unnaturally tall and thin, its limbs too long to belong to any person. It moved slowly, almost gliding across the room, and then it froze, facing the window. Lisa tried to take a photo, but just as she clicked, the neighbor stepped into view. He turned his head directly toward the camera, as though he could see her through the lens. His eyes, even from this distance, seemed to pierce right through her. His gaze felt like a knife cutting into her. He knew she was watching. Lisa couldn't sit still any longer. She had to know what was going on inside that house. One evening, when the man left in his car, she gathered her courage and climbed over the fence into his yard. The backyard was as eerie as she'd imagined. Overgrown grass, rusty tools strewn about, and an odd silence that felt suffocating. Behind the house, she found something that sent a chill down her spine. A large, freshly dug pit covered by a partially dislodged tarp. Next to it were a few of the black plastic-wrapped packages he hadn't yet taken away. Curiosity overwhelmed her fear. She opened one of the packages and found old photographs. They were faded and yellowed, depicting children of various ages. But each face had been violently scratched out, the marks deep and deliberate. Alongside the photos were handwritten pages filled with strange symbols and an unidentifiable language. The papers reeked of dampness and metal, sending waves of unease through her. Before she could process what she was seeing, she heard the sound of a key turning in the back door. The man had returned. Lisa's breath caught as she hastily resealed the package and crouched behind a tree at the edge of the yard. The door creaked open, and she heard his heavy footsteps on the wooden porch. Lisa froze behind the tree, holding her breath as the neighbor stepped into the yard, and stopped just feet away from her hiding spot. Lisa held her breath, her back pressed against the rough bark of the tree. She could hear the neighbor's heavy footsteps as he moved around the yard. He stopped near the packages she had touched, bending down to inspect them. His hands clenched into fists, and his movements grew sharper, more deliberate. He muttered something under his breath, a low, incomprehensible growl that sent shivers down her spine. He began pacing the yard, his gaze scanning every shadow. Lisa could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as his steps grew closer to her hiding spot. She pressed herself even harder against the tree, willing herself to disappear. The neighbor paused mere feet from her, his head tilting slightly as if sensing her presence. After a long moment, he exhaled sharply and turned away, walking back toward the house. Lisa waited until she heard the door close before she dared to move. She slipped out of the yard as quietly as she could, her legs trembling beneath her. Once she was safely back in her house, she locked every door and window, her hands shaking. But the terror didn't subside. The scratched photos and strange symbols swirled in her mind. This isn't just a strange man, she thought. He's hiding something dark. The next morning, Lisa went to the police, clutching her camera footage and trembling with urgency. She explained everything, the noises, the packages, the pit in the backyard. But the officer she spoke to frowned and shook his head. "Without solid evidence, we can't do anything," he said. "It sounds suspicious, but suspicion isn't a crime." Frustrated and disheartened, Lisa returned home. She felt trapped, powerless to stop whatever was happening next door. That evening, as the sun set, her anxiety grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that her neighbor was watching her, even from a distance. Late that night, Lisa sat in her living room, trying to distract herself with a book. But then she saw movement outside her window. First, she thought it was her imagination, but then she saw him. Her neighbor stood just outside, shrouded in shadows, staring directly at her. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was suffocating. Lisa froze in her seat, her hand instinctively reaching for her phone. But she couldn't bring herself to call anyone. What would she even say? For what felt like an eternity, he stayed there, motionless, his eyes never leaving her. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he turned and melted into the darkness. But the dread he left behind lingered long after he was gone. That night, Lisa realized she had become his next target. Fear had become a constant companion for Lisa. Her neighbor hadn't approached her window again, but his absence felt even more menacing. She knew she couldn't rely on anyone else to stop him. Gathering all her courage, Lisa decided to take matters into her own hands. One night, when she was sure he had left the house, she grabbed a flashlight and headed back to his property. The back door was unlocked, just as it had been before. She stepped inside, her heart pounding as she moved through the silent, darkened house. The air was heavy with a strange, metallic scent that made her stomach churn. She found the door to the basement and hesitated for only a moment before descending into the shadows. The basement was cold and damp, but what she found there sent a chill through her entire body. The walls were lined with photographs. Old, yellowed images of people, some smiling, some staring blankly at the camera. She recognized a few of them as faces she had seen on missing persons posters around town. Her stomach twisted as she realized that none of these people were likely alive anymore. In the center of the room was a table covered in papers, notebooks, and a list of names. Lisa's eyes scanned the list, her breath hitching when she saw her own name at the very bottom. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of the notebooks. It was filled with cryptic symbols and writing she couldn't understand, but the sinister nature of it was undeniable. She felt like she was peering into the mind of someone truly monstrous. Suddenly, she heard the sound of the back door opening. Her neighbor had returned. Lisa froze, her mind racing as she tried to think of a way out. His heavy footsteps grew louder as he descended the stairs. In her panic, she accidentally knocked over a glass jar filled with a strange liquid. It shattered on the floor, and almost instantly, the liquid ignited into flames. The fire spread quickly, licking up the walls and consuming the photographs and papers. Lisa used the chaos to her advantage, darting past the man as he shouted something she couldn't make out. She sprinted up the stairs and out of the house, not stopping until she was safely across the street. Behind her, the fire roared, engulfing the house in a matter of minutes. When the police and fire department arrived, it was too late. The house was destroyed, reduced to smoldering ruins. Lisa tried to explain what she had seen, but with no physical evidence left behind, the authorities dismissed her claims as the ravings of a frightened woman. Strangely, no trace of her neighbor was found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. It seemed like it was all over. But the next morning, Lisa found something on her kitchen table that froze her blood. A photograph of herself, taken from outside her window. Beneath it was a single line scrawled in shaky handwriting. "You're next. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. This is just the beginning of the stories we'll uncover here at Horror Haven. Don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey into the unknown. Until next time, stay safe. Or, at the very least, stay in the light.